I'm Bob Dickie, and welcome to another episode of Taking the Leap podcast. My guest today is Jason Radisson, the founder and CEO at ShiftOne. Jason has a Bachelor of Arts from the College of Holy Cross with honors in political science. He was a Fulbright Scholar in economics at the University of Göttingen in Germany and started his PhD at Harvard in economics. Jason has had an incredible career working at McKinsey, Uber, 99, an Uber competitor in Brazil, and other stops along the way that get him today to where he is as the CEO and founder of ShiftOne. They have a pretty big and audacious task in front of them. They're helping lead a revolution for frontline workers, solving the world's largest employment gaps with technology. I think this conversation is going to be very informative, so let's jump right in. Jason Radisson, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I'm super excited to be able to chat with you.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been doing a little research on your background, and my goodness, you have quite the pedigree, educational background, a Bachelor of Arts from Holy Cross in economics, and then you've gone on, you're a Fulbright Scholar, you've done studies in Europe, and then you've started a PhD at Harvard, you've done some studies at a Stanford Graduate School of Business. And then to take all that fine education, take a look at some of the places that you've worked globally. I mean, it's been it's kind of like the gold standard. My goodness, you've worked at McKinsey, you've worked at Uber, you've worked at all sorts of tech startups, and now you find yourself as a CEO and founder of a brand new startup, ShiftOne. And I want to hear a little bit more about this because it's absolutely fascinating. It's solving the world's largest employment gaps with technology. But before we get into all of that, give me a little of your origin story. Like, who are you? How did you decide to go through all these various career pivots and leaps? And what brings you to be a passionate CEO and leader today to try to solve the world's largest employment gaps with technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that introduction, Robert. And I came up in probably one of the most difficult ways possible. A child of a 16-year-old single mom, and I think that experience it can go many different ways. Mm-hmm. Certainly the odds are against you, and we had a really strong work ethic, and I think fundamentally a philosophy and a family culture of putting one foot in front of the other and succeeding through hard work. And so my earliest experiences were really all about how you kind of bootstrap life and work your way through things and all kinds of adversity. And, I saw my mom on that journey, working all kinds of jobs and putting herself through school, eventually through teachers college. And, in my own education, I worked all along the way to fund my own education. And for me, I think the practical experience of having a job while you're a student, while you're a high school student, while you're a college student, a grad student, I think that really grounds you in sort of the practical side of education. We all, enjoy expanding our horizons in education in other ways, just the intellectual growth that comes with it. But when you have to work your way through school, it really gives you that grounding in, am I getting skills that the market needs and that eventually that will help me reach a better standard of living for myself and my family. So that really was my very, very earliest experiences. And I think it all lends itself super well to the job of startup CEO, startup founder. Because that's a big part of the job, is making sure that you're successful and you're delivering what the world really practically needs at every point in time as you're building the company.
So I would imagine that grit, that hard work that you mentioned, the perseverance, those are all things that you learned and had to learn at a very early age. You carried that through your educational journey. I think you were probably motivated and inspired to get a great education to try to have a better life for yourself. Before we pivot into maybe some of the mentoring and the coaching that you got in your professional career? Because I would imagine, having worked at McKinsey and Uber, and you were able to rub shoulders with incredible individuals, thought leaders. I'd love to hear the advice that they were giving you along the way to mold you into an entrepreneur. But even before we get there, was your mom and other people around you early in life, were they advocates for furthering education, and were they mentoring and coaching you and inspiring you to do great things in your life? I mean, I don't think that you do great things in life without a coach or a mentor, someone helping you along the way, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think it's a lot of the when you grow up. I think part of the way I grew up, it's you have this proximity to work, and sort of you develop a very different work ethic, than you might in another circumstance, because you're that close to it. And I mean, like, literally, in terms of childcare looks very different when you grow up in poverty, and when you only have a parent and no network. The network becomes the people sort of in the community. It's the neighbors upstairs in your apartment building. It's in my case, the professors at my mom's college who watched me. It's these kinds of things, or let me go to classes. So, if my mom didn't have childcare. So it's these kinds of things that very, very early on, you start to understand that a big part of what adults do is they work, and you see it. You're not sequestered off in, a play group or something like that. A big part of that was my childcare. A lot of it was just being in a work environment, and seeing that, having that from a super early age, having that from 2, 3, 4 on. I was in that environment, so I thought that was natural. And for me, that I think that proximity, and there's a lot of almost too many individuals to count, that were all part of that environment in my early days, and it really truly was that community, that village, that helped to raise me.
Wow. And then moving on into your professional career, I mean, the various institutions that you were at, I mean, you were able to rub shoulders with, entrepreneurs, the folks at McKinsey. I mean, it is known as the benchmark. I mean, I've read multiple books on McKinsey, being able to get hired there and work there. I mean, they hire only the best of the best. I mean, going to schools like the Holy Cross, and then being a Fulbright scholar, and starting a PhD at Harvard, and graduate work at Stanford School of Business. I mean, these are iconic institutions. And so what are you learning as you are progressing through the ranks educationally, there with the people that you're meeting and the entrepreneurs? I mean, I can't wait to hear your stories at Uber, because my goodness, I mean, that they've literally just transformed the global economy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the path of education. I was fortunate. I think, in particular, we had some ways, and the system worked when I was coming up. In some ways, there were opportunities that there were people in the educational system looking out for you. And I don't think this is evenly distributed. I think I was really lucky. I grew up in Massachusetts, in kind of not Boston or Cambridge or something like that, but out in a hill town. And there were people that helped move me along, and I was in sort of these curricula that provided mentorship. I had engineering mentors in elementary school.
Wow.
I had other kind of programs that the system provided for poor kids who were doing really well, and provided us extra opportunities. I don't know, if I had been, there are so many other regions of the country where that wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So I think that was super fortunate. That set a number of things sort of in motion. Testing really worked well for me. A lot of times when you come from a school system that doesn't have any resources, if you can get a great test result, that can help you get into institutions and really open up other doors for you. And that was really the case with me. And I have to say, Holy Cross is a very special place. It's unusual to have a school that provides that much support to kids that are coming from backgrounds like me, with that kind of quality and that kind of financial and other support. It was a great community, and that really is what kind of educationally really opened up everything for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've certainly made the best of all the opportunities that have come your way, and I know we're going to get into why you're so passionate about your current role at ShiftOne, and it strikes me as I've done some research on what you're doing and the things that you're passionate about. I mean, your origin story as a young boy coming up, probably like as you said, maybe in poverty, very on the razor's edge, watching your mom navigate to do the best that she possibly can, working various jobs, getting education. You have a deep empathy for, I think, people in their career and people who are struggling to make ends meet. And here we are today in a changing global economy. The workforce, I mean, the economy is changing so rapidly, and people are having a hard time to upskill and stay abreast of all these various changes. And it strikes me that this great empathy that you have comes from your background, and it is really helping you and giving you insight into how to help this modern workforce, and for you to lean into this problem.
100%. Yeah, I think fundamentally, a talent is really evenly distributed throughout the world. There are talented people everywhere, all parts of society, all different countries and geographies, and it really is one of the main motivations of our company and of our mission. Mm-hmm. And fundamentally, everybody has that they start out with, and that can be formed into a better life, into the career skills and the kinds of things that can help them improve their standard of living and their own family and the folks in their family that come after them. So I believe fundamentally in providing that opportunity to people, regardless of where they start in life. Mm-hmm. And that has been a main motivation of ShiftOne and the mission that we're on.
Well, we're going through this massive transformation in the labor markets, and it feels like nobody's been able to fix it. Well, and this is an area that you're working on. What are the things that you see? I mean, I read all the time, I hear that entrepreneurs have an insight. They see something, they understand something that other people don't see, and they're leaning into that area. That's what you're doing right now with ShiftOne. What is your insight? What do you see?
Well, fundamentally, we've got this opportunity. We've got this historic point in time where, there's just a real imbalance that we're all talking about. It's become popular conversation in the last couple of years about there not being enough frontline workers in the world, particularly in a rich country like the U.S., where we really struggle with things. There are a lot of structural reasons why that's the case. There are demographic reasons. There's a participation kind of issue in the economy more broadly these days, where a lot of folks are just choosing either retire earlier or just sit out the workforce for the pandemic. And now we're post-pandemic for the most part, and we still have a lot of this behavior. So when we were seeing this already. Obviously, the worker shortages didn't just emerge. They were there, and they were there in a number of sectors even before the pandemic, and it's just all gotten worse. I think our insight is that technology can make the labor markets more efficient, and the technology that we're talking about, it's existed for a while. We're really applying, if you look at labor marketplaces, and fundamentally you can argue that a company like Uber or a company like Rappi or DoorDash, these companies are basically labor marketplaces. And if you look at these models, we really are sort of building on the rails that the commerce industry had already developed. There was already, broadly speaking, ways of bringing markets together to bring transparency into markets, to move those markets to the internet, to move those markets to mobile applications. We're doing essentially the same thing with labor that e-commerce did with retail. And I think in our, particular case, I saw the opportunity to take that same kind of technology that we're using to employ drivers to bring it to the more kind of traditional roles in frontline work across the country. And we started in light industrial, logistics, retail, manufacturing, kind of the traditional blue collar roles. And now as we expand, we're expanding into some of the other areas of the economy that are adjacent. We're getting into clean technology, we're getting into healthcare and travel nursing and some other parts of the economy. But it all goes back to making that market more efficient and using cloud technologies, using modern platforms to help people find work, to help companies find workers that are out there. Fundamentally what we're trying to do.
So would you use labor market, gig economy, freelancer revolution, or do you think that all of those are interchangeable? And 'cause I've heard you mention the labor market and the things that like DoorDash was a revolution, Uber was a revolution. These and you if I look back in history, like the various jobs, part-time jobs that were available to people 20, 30 years ago, radically different today. There's so many ways that a person can be a part of the gig revolution or be a part of the freelancer economy, and technology has really opened that up. So I just want to make sure I'm connecting those dots. Do you feel that all of those are interconnected or interchangeable?
100%. So, I mean, we make, some slight differentiations there. I think on the gig side, we think about taking a job and putting it into and letting people sign up for different parts of that job.
Okay.
Working a few hours here or there, working one half of the job while somebody else works a different half of the job. There are a lot of things that are possible once you have a platform in place and you have a way of really efficiently connecting workers and jobs. In our world, we've really chosen in ShiftOne to focus more on, full-time and beyond, sort of full-time or jobs that are full-time plus overtime, the kind of jobs that, can put kids through school, that can pay a mortgage, that can become a career path. And so we're more focusing on that part of the economy, and the folks that are really looking to get into a profession, start on the entry level. Maybe there's no schooling required, just a little on-the-job training, and then over time, get those degrees, get those certifications so that they can level up. It's not to say that some of these jobs can't also be broken into smaller gigs, but for the most part, what we're working in is full-time.
That is a great way of helping clarify my question. You've given me some new insight here on how to distinguish between the three of those. So would examples of that full-time frontline worker, I've been on your website, it looks like it would also be like service workers, maybe in the restaurant industry. It could also be service workers in other types of trades, warehouse. What are the sectors that you feel are like, this is the sweet spot of how we're servicing employees in these particular sectors?
Yeah, absolutely. We're super focused on travel, frontline skilled travel work. So travel nursing being one of the kind of the classic jobs there. Field engineers being a classic job there. These are booming parts of the economy and some of the toughest labor problems in the economy. Particularly if you look at like what's underneath it, the healthcare industry and sort of the structural things of boomers retiring. We have, at the same time, we're struggling to have enough nurses in our economy. We've got all this booming demand for healthcare and health services. With field engineering, a lot of that is coming from clean technology and environmental concerns and sort of the switch that, different states and jurisdictions and power companies, frankly, are making the cleaner and cleaner forms of energy. Even just in the early days, as it seems that we are in a lot of those transitions, those are some of the fastest growing jobs in the country. If you look at windmill technologies, engineering jobs that support that, solar technologies, installation technicians and engineers, and even geothermal as a booming new part of the economy. So those are I would say our primary focus. On the entry level, and these can be a lot of the gateway jobs to other things. We work in manufacturing with machine operations, machine operators, the kinds of folks that keep production running, production machinery running, industrial robotics running, those kinds of technical jobs. And then on our very entry level, we go all the way down to somebody who is just coming out of high school and getting their first job in a warehouse and working their very first logistics job. And kind of everything in between. There are a lot of different jobs in there. There are 40 or 50 different job classes that we work in, and they all are somewhere in that range, from that very entry level, just out of high school or technical high school, all the way up to somebody who has a master's of engineering or a master's of nursing.
So would this be considered a dual-sided marketplace, similar to some of the things that you would have done at Uber early on? In case studies I've read about Uber is that there's these challenges. You needed to make sure that you were growing the public demand side in relation to also the supply side of vehicles or drivers. You had to grow both of those together. You were solving problems on both sides of the ledger. And with ShiftOne, what is the friction that you're removing for the employee, or the benefit you're giving them, and what's the friction that you're removing and the benefit that you're giving the business? I'm imagining there's something on both sides of that ledger, correct?
Yeah, totally. To the first part of your question, 100%. And I think those of us who were operators in the earlier generation of companies, what we would say is the mark of a really good general manager, regional general manager, country manager in that world is how good you and the team are at balancing both sides. Because if you balance both sides, it takes very little capital to grow a really nice, robust marketplace. If you're imbalanced, you're spending a lot of money. You're either paying money to incentivize drivers to get out there and work, or you're paying money to get consumers to use the platform. If you're balanced, it just grows, and it's beautiful. In our world, it's our demand side is very B2B. So it's a little bit different in that, we've got a sales cycle, and we're working with, for the most part, big national companies who have facilities in different states and different regions. And typically what we do, even on the demand side, is we really focus on their toughest problems. We're a startup in this space. We're coming from, sort of the extreme environment of the gig economy, and some of the stuff we've been through. And so, if there's one thing that we really can sort of, differentiate on in that moment for our clients, it's finding workers when other people can't, and finding really good workers, and putting together teams in ways that other people can't. So typically when we start to work with a national client, we'll focus on their factories, on their facilities, on their hospitals that have the worst possible problems, and then sort of help solve their biggest pain points. And then, we sort of move on from there to other secondary sites. So that's how we're sort of providing the balance in the marketplace. And if it's travel jobs, what's so nice about travel jobs is you're not limited to any one area, of course. You can sort of get the supply from all over the country to be able to fill those different spots of demand. So that's a little bit of our preference. Travel is even more efficient than local work. And then local work, we really, we pride ourselves on, and we have some great capabilities just around being able to get together way more workers than are needed. And then, we can be super precise in terms of who we're deploying and how we curate those teams that we deploy to our clients.
Well, this next question might be moving into the realm of politics a little bit, but I'm curious, since you're working in this space, if you have your finger on the pulse of this. As I have talked to CEOs and business owners around the country, and specifically the current labor shortages that many of them, and this is not just frontline workers in the restaurant space. I mean, we've all gone out to a restaurant and said, "Hey, we apologize, be patient with us. We don't have enough staff." We've seen these signs everywhere, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier as people are looking to fill these various important roles. But as I've been talking with these business leaders, two things that come up, that there are two hot button issues. There's individuals who say, "Bob, I can't get people to come in. I've got, whether it's in the steel industry or the restaurant industry, the agricultural industry, I have frontline workers that I desperately need. They're not there. The people have just gone home and they're not willing to actually do that job." And there's been some interesting conversations where it's been around U.S. citizens, right? We're just like, you know what? They just young kids today coming up out of high school, whatever, don't want to do those jobs, which then leads us into the next part of the conversation of, my goodness, we've closed the borders, and the United States desperately needs the immigration pipelines, not just the H-1B1 visas of tech workers in Silicon Valley, but we need the frontline workers in a whole slew of career fields that if we don't have that pipeline of talent, the United States economy doesn't function as properly. What are you noticing, and what is there advice that you would have on that? Like, what can we do for U.S. citizens, or to inspire young people into some of the trades? And, what advice would you have for politicians who are in D.C. making decisions on the needs of American businesses and our immigration?
Yeah, 100%. And I think everybody kind of comes down where they come down in terms of spending and how much government program work we could do to incentivize different parts of that question, of that solution. What I would say is we are definitely seeing declining workforce participation, particularly in younger folks who should be filling those entry-level jobs. There are some opportunities around that, including bringing older folks back into the workforce and bringing them into some of those jobs, and making those jobs the kind of jobs that they would want to have. We see, we work with clients all the time on wages and job conditions. I would say, approaching 100% of our deployments have some degree of wage adjustment, some degree of sort of workplace modifications and things, schedule modifications. And it really puts us in a great position to be able to provide the client that kind of guidance. We're at 80% filled on second shift. If we, could pull these 2 or 3 different levers, we have another 50 candidates off to the side that we think would be interested in this work we could bring in to do this job. So, I think it's part of it is just there's some worker levers, and then I think a big part of the change really is on the employer side and sort of evaluating the market. And we get, I think people just have the momentum that they had, and a lot of these decisions were made before the pandemic, where the job is what it is, it has the hours that it has, and oftentimes it's just small modifications you got to make, and then it becomes attractive to a whole lot more folks. I think that's part of it. I think we're in a unique position to be able to provide for workers who are kind of on the fence and entry level. We're able to provide them more of a prospect of a career ladder and career development that is a little bit more enticing than if I'm just going to go get a warehouse job for a couple months. They can stay with us and they can develop further. So it's a combination really of different levers locally that I think really need to be deployed. And then some of the things that are a little bit more out of the box, we're getting into relocation programs. And generally, those are kind of hard to fund at the very entry level. Um, Entry level guys don't often need as much support. It might just literally be their suitcase and their car that they have to drive a few states over. Um, but being able to provide enough assistance and enough job security that it makes it worthwhile to somebody to move over to where the work is and where they're needed. So there are a few things there that can also be done. Um, and then what I would say about the whole question of immigration is it's a huge opportunity. We've been super active with the Department of Labor on H-2B. And in particular, we do the same kind of work in Latin America, in Colombia, in Peru, and we've been doing a little bit of work in Mexico in that challenging environment. And what I can say about those markets is they still have high unemployment. And you've got a lot of folks who would be thrilled to have the opportunity to work in the U.S. On some kind of a guest worker program, maybe come over for a couple of years and contribute and take up a lot of these jobs that aren't being filled. And particularly that might be in a region that's very hard to fill, that might be in rural Kansas or rural Ohio or some of the other places that we work. I think that program is really, it's the beginning of something. It's just for my, experience and sort of what we've been seeing in our company, it's much too small these days. It's 30-something thousand twice a year. That program could probably be 1 million people, and it would still be fully subscribed. It just runs out so quickly, and I think there are so many hoops to kind of jump through. Mm-hmm. You have to prove that a job is very short duration as an employer. You have to prove that the job has a very strong seasonal nature, and even though it's not an agricultural program, you still have to prove that there's this extreme sort of temporary need. Mm-hmm. And I think we're at the point in the economy where we should be able to say, you know what, in this particular state, we're 1 million workers short. So we're going to, import 200,000 workers and we're going to keep them for 2 or 3 years. Yep. Similar to the way that some of Europe did following the Second World War, where, some of the countries that were short workers just literally imported millions of workers to fill those empty slots. I think we're literally at that point right now in the U.S. I'd love to see the H-2B program expanded to be much more broad in scope. Mm. I think it would help the economy tremendously.
Yeah, I do as well. A moment ago, you mentioned that people who are engaging with you, one of the benefits is that they're looking at the engagement with ShiftOne as a way in which they could have a longer term relationship or maybe a career. And I'd like to double click on that thought process. Let's use pretend a large Amazon warehouse in Kansas is putting job applications out there. So a person could just I'm going to apply and go directly to Amazon, or I could apply, have a partnership through ShiftOne. What's the difference? How are you? I'm assuming that you're giving them some skills, some training, and a relationship with you is providing them a better opportunity for career progression and career. Help explain a little bit of that.
Yeah, 100%. So what I would say about logistics is, it is an area of our economy that doesn't have a lot of rungs on the ladder. It has a tremendous entry level. It's a great first job for a lot of folks. Just get the skills of going to work and working a full schedule and earning a paycheck and paying taxes and going through kind of all the normal early career experiences, but there aren't a lot of places you can go from there. It takes a while to get up to a leadership position. It has a limited number of machine operation roles. You can learn to drive a forklift. You can go a bit on that path. In that sense, the logistics industry isn't the quickest way to sort of advance in your career. nor kind of like the most sure way of advancing in your career. And so what we're able to offer is, an entry level wherever, but then also opportunities to switch industries, to switch verticals, and to find some spots that have more rungs on the ladder. And I would highlight there, particularly manufacturing. We've been going through, we're now a couple decades into sort of the evolution of e-commerce. We've got a lot of logistics related to that. We're doing less manufacturing at home than we have, historically. So there's less manufacturing opportunity than there used to be. But even that said, the typical manufacturing environment has so many more rungs on the ladder than a logistics environment. And so for that reason, we naturally offer services to both types of clients, and for our workers, we're able to sort of swing them in and out of different opportunities in both of those verticals. Those are two verticals really, really closely aligned, and really a spot where we see that happen all the time. We bring somebody from an entry-level logistics role as maybe a packing shipments, or maybe doing receiving and things like that, into a machine operation role with more responsibility and more technical needs and skill building on the manufacturing side. And then we're even able to bring them back over into logistics, maybe in a supervisory role and some other things. So it's just, it's like anything else, in career pathing, the more opportunities you have to develop skills and deep skills, the better off the outcomes are going to be. And that's really what we're seeing.
Oh, it's brilliant. I love the way that you're tackling that problem, because if I'm a manager at, let's say, Amazon, I'm really not concerned about career progression for a whole bunch of people. I've got jobs in the warehouse. I need it done. I need packages going through. That is my main concern. And so it's like, hey, and there's a lot of people in the economy like, I desperately need to pay my bills. I need to make ends meet this month. And they'll sign up for that role. But once they're there, it's one and done. You're kind of stuck. Working and partnering with you on the other side, you're like, hey, I want to be able to help you get that role. But I also have a longer time horizon, and I know of all these other needs out here in society. And when you're ready to pivot, when you're ready to upskill, I can help you move to another spot where you can have career progression. I would imagine that's probably something your mom was looking for early on in her career. And had ShiftOne been there when your mom was coming up through the system, that her pathway and progression would have been easier. I know that in the conversations that we've had prior to this, in the email exchanges, one of the things that you're passionate about is upskilling, right? So with automation and everything that's happening right now, we're seeing a lot of frontline work. We're seeing it, automation in restaurants. This is there's going to be, as Mark Andreessen has famously said, software's eating the world, right? So there's going to be a lot of job destruction with automation. What should people be doing right now to upskill? Why are you passionate about it? And where are there areas of opportunity?
That's 100%, 100%. And I think, that's, going to be, I think when we look back on this period 20, 30 years from now, we're going to see not only a real increase in automation, but we're going to see an evolution in the front line in a way we haven't seen, previously. And that for me is these jobs, as they get automated away, and we see it in our client sites all the time, a manual line where you have 20 guys who are taking parts off of machines and putting them into boxes. Those are some of the first things that get automated away, right? You have a large number of people doing an unskilled task. And they get automated away, and then there's a sophisticated piece of machinery there, and you still need 3 guys, one in each shift, to run that machine, to troubleshoot that machine, to optimize that machine and its output. And that's the story that's unfolding here. Is those really entry level jobs, they're still going to be there. They're going to be 2 or 3 skill levels higher. They're going to be at least semi-skilled, if not skilled. They're going to have higher requirements, and they're going to pay a lot better. And so, that's where we're headed. And that's why I think it's just where we need to be as a company. We can't sort of build a company around unskilled work. The unskilled work is really just an on-ramp. It's a first rung of the ladder for our guys. And as our workforce progresses, really our job is to get them into those higher skills as soon as possible, get them into those skilled machine roles, machine operation roles, get them into engineering roles, get them into healthcare roles, if that's their passion.
That's brilliant. Are there things that you would be recommending for members, in those entry level jobs right now to be doing it with Coursera, edX? I mean, there's so many different places you can go right now to start learning a little bit about whether it's computer languaging or computer programming or various skills. Are there things that people can be doing to be like, I know I'm going to want to progress. I know I want to get out of my particular line of work, and I want to start stretching my mind, start exercising my mind a little bit to understand where this economy is going.
100%. Short term, it's taking a look at the machines that are around you and some of the automated processes that are around you, and taking an interest and expressing that curiosity in terms of how the plant or how the operation is running. Those are the kinds of thoughts, and if you're seeking those opportunities, those are the kinds of roles that can immediately give you a big bump up. It could be for somebody who's packing boxes. It could literally be learning to drive the forklift on that particular line. A little bit more medium long term, it's definitely getting that associate or bachelor's degree. And the associate's degrees, that we're seeing, I mean, definitely on anything on mechanical and electrical, anything on healthcare or nursing. Those are the slots. Those are the opportunities of the next 20 years in our economy. Those are really those entry-level jobs of the future, getting yourself to that point. And then from there, you're in the job, you have an associate's, you're getting a lot of more challenging career development and cool stuff to work on, and much higher pay. And from there, getting as far up the ladder as you can. If you can then go on to get that bachelor's of nursing, or go on to get that mechanical engineering MS, whatever it is, that's really the path as we see it in the entry level.
One of the most important skills has got to be becoming a lifelong learner, being passionate about learning. I've heard multiple CEOs say, Bob, one of the key things that young people need to do is learn how to learn, and then how to apply those skills as quickly as possible, because they're going to be constantly, acquire a new skill, implement it, acquire a new skill, implement it. So it's everything that you're saying here is resonating with things I've heard from other business owners and leaders. Jason, one of the things that is so impressive about your career is how many unicorns you've worked with. What have you, that's a term we hear quite frequently in the VC world, Jason Calacanis and, the guys on the All In podcast or other places constantly talking about the unicorns in the new global economy. Since you've had an opportunity to work with so many of them, what are some of the secrets that you've learned? What's the secret of building a unicorn in a great company?
Yeah, 100%. Well, it begins with really having a transformational perspective and transformational technology. And then I think what really differentiates one unicorn to the next, or one potential unicorn, to the companies that have successfully scaled, it really comes down to how you manage growth and broader societal change, because you are out there with your city teams as really change agents in local politics and the local economy, and doing that really well, having a unique perspective on it, and being planful, and really looking for transformative win-win situations. I think one of the things that kind of differentiates me in scaling is, I think with time, I've sort of grown to have an appreciation for, sort of picking the markets and picking the spots to bet on in scaling the company. In other words, you can look for, sort of total coverage of a country, of a geography, But you can also choose the order of cities and markets that you go after, sort of the order of different segments that you go after. And there's a lot in sort of how you decide to approach the scale up, and a lot of that strategy work that really goes a long way to making it an efficient and successful scale up. That's what I would really say in terms of sort of, my track record in growing unicorns. A lot of it comes down to picking which markets you play in and which ones you don't. An example would be, if you look at ride sharing, most of the profits in the ride sharing world weren't in the US, they weren't in China. They were literally in the secondary cities of Brazil in Latin America.
Wow.
And it's, there are a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of structural reasons. You have a thriving middle class, upper middle class. You have, just super congested cities, super concentrated cities, and you have super high unemployment and a ready pool of drivers. And so those markets came together in a much more balanced, much more efficient way than, a crazy market like San Francisco. So it really, those are, I think, some of the key insights and kind of key learnings. And we got advanced enough, and I, worked sort of at different phases of kind of all throughout the scale up of ride sharing and delivery. And, sort of the last couple of years, we've gotten super, super planful. So, if I look at sort of how my team and I launched Brazil and scaled up Brazil at 99 taxis, we were at a point where we could plan every city launch long in advance. We sort of had a very detailed battle plan in how we were going to take most of the market share back from Uber. We ended up taking 30-40% of the market back from Uber in just a few months of launching. That was all entirely by design and sort of putting the right teams together and the right battle plan together to go out and launch cities in a very efficient way. I think that's really what, if you look at the use of capital in some of these bigger platform companies, what it comes down to is that sort of scale up and not doing launches and running cities in an unprofitable way. And we were able to avoid most of it.
Well, that's a brilliant insight. It sounds like as you were with 99, you started with an insight and then executed on it, and it was extremely profitable, where a lot of other companies, especially ones that have received a ton of VC backing, they've got a huge war chest. Maybe they don't start with an insight. They've got an idea, but they're like, well, I'm just going to test it and see if it works. Well, you can burn through a ton of capital testing out ideas that don't work, that fail, correct?
That's right. We set out to launch cities that were going to be immediately profitable in the most efficient way. Mm-hmm. And God bless the other startups that may have been out there that, needed to get to volume no matter what. It's really tough. And I think the challenge of doing a scale up where there isn't a clear path to profitability is you get eventually to that, down cycle in capital, that challenging fundraise. You get to whatever point where the bill finally comes and you haven't yet figured out how you're going to get to profitability and a sustainable model. And I think that's really, if you look at most of the backlash and sort of, some of the negative experiences around unicorns and some of the platform companies, that's the situation that they got themselves into. Mm-hmm. We maybe a luxury, good luck, in terms of the markets that we were in. But definitely if I sort of translate that also to my current company and what we're building at ShiftOne, we are looking only at markets, and we're only running in geographies and with clients where we've got a sustainable business model and we've got a path to profitable growth. If it's not, we don't get involved with it in the first place, and we leave it to a competitor or somebody else to try to solve.
Yeah, you may say, well, that sounds like a great idea. I know that there's one person that wants it, or somebody wants us to get in that line of business, but that's not part of the strategic plan right now. We're going to,
Yeah.
as Steve Jobs said, I'm more proud of the things I said no to, right, than the things I said yes to. And so we're just going to leave that one on the shelf, and we're not going to deal with it. I was talking with a good friend of mine who's in private equity, and he has had a string of not just home runs, but grand slams. And we were in a small group. We were talking. I was like, okay, what's the magic sauce? What's your secret to this? Right? Are you just like an incredible operator? Are you just like this world class technologist? How in the world are you stringing all these together? His comment was very insightful, and it strikes me as probably one of the secrets to your success. He just said, you know what, Bob? I think I figured out how to pick the right company that was about ready to, go through this massive transformation. And, so he had his insight, which helped him in the picking, right, of the company that he was going to go work for next. You're having insights on where you're going to deploy your time, capital, resources. As what's the matrix or the framework that you use? How do you uh, look at all the information and come to the various insights that you do within your career, and specifically right now with ShiftOne?
Yeah, 100%. So, you know, um, a KPI, a sort of North Star for me, for the team, is we're definitely looking at our GMV to burn ratio. So it's a just a very clean capital efficiency, capital deployment metric. Um, we talk about it specifically as a ratio. Oh, that's a market we think we can get to 20x, or that's a market that's really challenging and it's only going to be 1x. Meaning, right, for $1 million invested, I get $1 million of recurring GMV. Would be a 1x. A 20x would be I invested $1 million and I have a $20 million GMV business. And if you look at the most efficient launches and the most efficient kind of marketplaces that are out there, they tend to cluster, 10 to 20 on the really sustainable, nice businesses. And then there are a ton of businesses I would never invest in that are down around one. Or if you look at some of the labor marketplaces that are out there, some of the short-term gig marketplaces that are out there, the ratio is even below one.
Oh, wow.
So it's really, that's the overall the metric that says, if you're going to get to kind of escape velocity and get a really nice scale or not. And if we can't, we're thinking about a business plan, evaluating a couple of different business plans, entering a new country, taking on some new clients, we look at those ratios and sort of make our decisions from there. I mean, obviously we're working on unit economics and profitability of that GMV, but on, kind of the most brute force metric, it's, how efficient is the launch. The other thing I should say is, part of our secret sauce too is I think we apply in these businesses, we apply a couple of the best sort of practices and cultural aspects of the technology world, which is like, we, in running our operations, we set everything up as a hill climbing process. And one of our mantras is the operation has to be better this week than it was last week. And a lot of that is, sort of open end in the early days of an operation. We're starting it out. We're not really sure about these different parameters. We're testing some different things. We just look for week over week improvement. And when you start adding together 1 or 2% or 5% week over week improvement, by the time you pull your head up, you've 10x this year, or you've 12x this year. So I think that's a really big component in running your operations such that teams have that control and they have that clarity of mission. And frankly, the freedom to do the experimentation that's required to get better every week. I think that's really fundamental and something that, I've definitely practiced throughout all my teams. I think another big piece of it is just a bias for automation. And anything that, is a process that gets done a couple of times, we ask ourselves internally, what are we doing to automate it? What's the most efficient way to get this back office process off a bunch of people's plates so that they can go work on a higher value activity. And so there's kind of this natural progression as we're scaling the business to just keep on automating things internally and in terms of our platform as we're rolling it out.
I love it. Do you guys employ Agile in your building, and you have like scrums and things along those lines? Those the scrum cycles.
Yep, 100%. And I think, I'm probably not unique in this, but definitely in my companies, we align the processes between the business and technology teams so that they're on the same calendar, the same cadence. So if the tech team is running, weekly Scrum, bi-weekly Scrum, then we run weekly or bi-weekly Scrum on the business side. And it just helps with product releases, with market entries, with field engineering tasks, with all of the kinds of things, that otherwise would lead to communication issues and just challenging, just frankly overhead to try to coordinate everybody. So that alignment in terms of process and methodology is fundamental for us. And then we tend to use the same tools, whatever our ticketing, task management tool is in engineering, we use it also on the business side, so that everybody is kind of has the transparency of everything that's going on inside the company and, is speaking kind of the same tool language and is able to kind of asynchronously keep track of stuff, right? I can just watch a bunch of engineering tasks. If I work in customer service, I don't actually need to go to meetings to find out developments. I can just watch the engineers completing them, or vice versa. If I'm an engineer working on a particular deployment and a particular client, I can just watch, the business completing some of those tasks. So I think those things are really important. They're more foundational. They're more, kind of hygiene items, but I think super important in terms of being able to run a really efficient and fast organization.
Well, there's a lot of talk today about what is going on in Silicon Valley. Mark Benioff just released a memo, I think that was leaked to the public and has been met with a lot of fanfare, where he's trying to get people to come back to Salesforce. You've got Twitter. Elon Musk has laid off a lot of folks and trying to bring people back into the headquarters. And, coming out of the post-COVID world, there's a lot of workers who want to continue to work remotely. You've got CEOs that are wanting to bring people back into a more of a corporate environment to have more hands-on, more culture building. It's a pretty interesting wrestling match at the moment. It strikes me as I'm listening to you talk that you've probably got a pretty diverse and remote workforce all over the place. I know I do, and I'm a different style company than what you're currently running. But give me some ideas of what are the things that you are employing, strategies that you have to continue to build culture, to have people, connected, to build this esprit de corps with a remotely separated workforce.
Well, a big part. Thanks for the question, and I think it gets kind of right to what's going on in our society today. A big part of when we were starting out a few years ago, just prior to the pandemic, launching this company, we would have, if you had polled the team, we would have said one of the key early differentiators was our culture on the ground. And if you look at Uber and, for all the press and, all of the headlines, one of the real bright spots in Uber was the ground culture, was the operations teams, was the field operations teams, some of the most dedicated, some of the most ethical and straight up folks that wanted to change the world that I've ever had the privilege of working with. And we had that kind of culture where if somebody needed help, they had a plane load of help and all kinds of folks just trying to jump in. And, right down to, our day-to-day and our dynamics in the office. And, if we needed to show up at 4 a.m., we showed up at 4 a.m. and we did a great job with it. That was the early culture of our company. And we were doing our first deployments in light industrial, and we would show up and people were like, wow, your teams come in and everybody has their head high and everybody is proud and humble and doing a good job. And what was kind of so jarring in the early days of the pandemic was like, oh my God, how are we going to do that? And sort of get that right esprit de corps together, get that right early team culture at each of our deployments so that our clients really get to feel that, and so that our workforce has, that kind of motivation and job satisfaction. We've been able to do it. We have off the charts job satisfaction, and we have great ratings if sort of been following that kind of stuff. But it's been a lot more difficult just holding everything together. And I think, thank God we're not commuting, because we need all that extra time to have all kinds of extra contact with our workers and with our professionals that are in different parts of the country. Those are the extra Zoom calls, those are the extra phone calls. And that's really what we're using that time for.
Oh, that's great.
For the kind of core engineering team, the core operations team, us folks that are very experienced in startups and things, we're used to kind of working by phone at all hours, and so for us there wasn't a big change, but it's really on that front line where it is just a very different world. Yeah. We think eventually, not to get too science fiction-y, but I think there's a world where part of our machine operation and our field engineering workforce becomes more remote, because frankly the machines are then better instrumented, with a little bit of AR technology. There's more of that kind of capability where you can see just kind of right around the corner where we might be doing a lot of machine operation in that modality. And I think, we're thinking about it with our platform. We're not specifically building product in that direction yet, but it's kind of a natural extension of where we are right now to be able to open up those jobs to folks.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's such an interesting time for us to be living. You take a look at, historically how the world changed at these various inflection points, and I would say work, right? Work and then life. And there's no doubt that we're living through that right now. The inflection points of AI. I mean, every morning I wake up and I'm hearing something new. I mean, the last few days it's been Chat GPT that's been all over the media, and how that automation is going to change everything. And I think the way in which we work, the way in which we live is changing. That there's no way of going back to pre-COVID. The genie is out of the bottle, and there's a certain demographic of people and a certain demographic of job that it's going to go remote. And I'm listening to more and more CEOs and business leaders say, "Look, yeah, here's my, this is what we're doing, and it works for us." And so it's just such an interesting time for us to be living and to be creating and to be remaking the world all around us. I love it.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, one of the things that I've been asking people, I want to make sure that folks know how to get in touch with you and follow you on Twitter and any of the socials, and how they can go out there and keep track of what's going on with ShiftOne. So let's make sure that we give them all of those things. And of course, they will be in the show notes. But final two questions for you. What are some of the great books that you have read in your career that have just been really great resources for you, helped you along in your career? Is there anything that you would recommend young people who are starting their career, maybe mid-career professionals that are pivoting and taking, leaps like you have done in your career? What great resources would you recommend?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's so many great books out there. I think Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm is important for anybody in technology or anybody thinking about getting into technology. It really describes product market fit in scaling a company in a way that few other resources do. And it really doesn't matter if you're a marketer, a salesperson, a potential founder, an engineer. That's a great resource. I think on, capital management, and capital is a piece of this. We all, have to manage capital as entrepreneurs. Probably the McKinsey book, Valuation, is one that's kind of, it's a perennial favorite. However, a lot of folks starting out haven't read it, haven't really gotten into it, and I think it's one of the places where I look. I was coming more from a math background. It's a book that gives you deep insight into really the mechanics underneath accounting and underneath corporate finance, and under a bunch of macro, micro, company level financial topics, and it gives you really a tool set for being able to analyze any company at any stage. I think there are the Bell books, which are Professor Bell at Harvard, two books. One is called Decision Making Under Certainty. The other one is called Decision Making Under Uncertainty.
Oh wow!
Those are two classics that never grow old, and they have a bunch of case studies and problems that folks can work through. They lend themselves also really to folks with an autodidactic tendency out there that might want to get into that and learn some skills around that. And they just teach you, I think, just some high level frameworks for thinking about business problems. This is one where best chance we're going to have an educated guess, and here's the math under that educated guess.
Okay.
Or, this is actually one where it's a linear programming problem, and we're going to know the exact answer, and here are the steps. And kind of the algorithm to get to the exact answer.
Okay.
Those are a couple of great ones that I'd mention also. My personal reading these days is a little bit more varied. I really like fiction. So, I think Cormac McCarthy and his two new books are kind of where I am right now.
Nice. All right.
Those are the ones on my nightstand, and I'm really enjoying. I'm in the first one, The Passenger,
Okay.
which is sort of the story of a mathematician brother, and the other book is called Stella Maris, and that's the story of his sister.
Okay.
And those are two that have come out. And I think what just recently, and what's so interesting about him, of course, is Cormac McCarthy is now 89 years old. I think you're right. Very differently. It's interesting to see his transformation throughout his career, and sort of at this age, and how he's thinking about problems, and to see his style change and sort of his approach to fiction change quite a bit in these last years. And I think it's been more than a decade. I think 15 or 16 years since his last book. So it's a real contrast to his previous writing.
I can't wait to get those. You've given me a couple books here that I don't have in my library, so I'm super excited about this. Yeah, I always love it when someone's giving me some new material. So this is great. Do you find that reading fiction at night before you go to bed, it just helps you kind of get off the topic of business? And I've had a number of leaders here recently that have said, yeah, I'm kind of reading this fiction book or that fiction book. A lot of times it's in the evening. For me, I find that my mind, I will just grind on stuff unless I can figure out a way to kind of like deprogram it and say, okay, I need to like decompress and think about something else to allow my mind to come down and finally get to a state of good sleep.
Yeah. Whatever works for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think, for anybody, I think everybody's a little bit different in that regard. For me, I'm super interested in the human condition, and I think all of the things that fiction opens up to you. And it's just, to state the obvious, right? The possibilities in fiction are endless. The possibilities in nonfiction are constrained to our current understanding of the world. Anything can happen in fiction, and it allows authors to set up just very interesting perspectives on human relations and human psychology. So for that reason, I get interested in the topic, and when the time comes to sleep, I'm able to sort of close the day with those thoughts, so it doesn't interrupt my sleep at all.
That's great. Well, final question. This is something I've been asking leaders recently, not just domestically, but also folks in England and folks in Canada. But we're living in some very interesting times, and you and I have just been talking about how exciting it can be. But it's also, it can be concerning. There can be times of anxiety for people as we're navigating changes in the economy, and then there's the wars and unsettling things happening in Ukraine, things that are happening in the South China Sea. You've got, domestic issues that can keep people up late at night. Imagine that you are the American president and you are about ready to give a State of the Union address to the American people. What would you say?
I think it's a great question, and if you look at where my answer or my challenge and solution, to the extent I could, to the American people would be, I think we're at this point in the technology cycle where we haven't had major large-scale technological breakthroughs in quite some time. We're still primarily living in, a number, if you look at the big technology companies that are out there, the large employers, they're 20 or 30 years old. If they're not 20 or 30 years old, the foundation that they built their company on is 20 or 30 years old.
Wow.
The transformation of personal computers, the transformation of cloud computing, mobile computing, and mobile networks. I think we're overdue for the next large technology wave. I think we're very late in this tech cycle. If I were American president addressing the American people, I would have programs, and my emphasis would be on accelerating the next waves of technology. And I think there's a lot that government can do there. It's not sort of by accident that some of the fastest development that we've seen in space technologies has been because of SpaceX. And that I think the approach and the lens there is very informative, because if you look, or at least my reading of sort of how Elon Musk has approached the problem, he said, fundamentally, we got to get the unit economics to a place where they work. Mm-hmm. So we need reusable rockets, and we need to get to super high volume. And if we get to super high volume, which we can kind of bootstrap on passenger flights and freight flights, kind of in near Earth orbit, then we get to a place where rocket technology gets cheap enough where we can start to get out into, putting more sophisticated operations on the moon, which then gets us out to other planets in the asteroid belt, which really is the seed of a whole new amazing industry that we're just around the corner from. What does it depend on? It depends on a little bit of initial legwork to get to that high volume in the core technology. How many other technology problems do we have that are just like that? And if we just got to critical mass on some fundamental technologies, that could open up an entirely new technology wave that would be on par with the internet and some of the other things that we've seen throughout history. So I don't know if it's a domestic Peace Corps around that, if it's, domestic programs where the government is, helping to get the demand volume to a place where the new technology can really take off. But I would go through and look at different core kind of foundational technologies and look for ways to accelerate them. That would be my State of the Union address.
Well, one thing I know, that if you don't run for president, we need you advising the White House. I love your thought process there. We need that level of thinking and strategy in a big way. I love the idea that there are all sorts of technologies that are ready for a renaissance, the next wave of technology to take over and change the world and solve the world's problems. Jason Radisson, you are the founder and CEO of ShiftOne, and you, my friend, are solving the world's largest employment gaps with technology, and that is a big issue. So you've got your hands around an Elon Musk-style problem, and I'm looking forward to watching you solve it. And this has been so enjoyable. I've learned a lot. I've taken a lot of notes today, and I know that our audience is going to find this be very informative and useful as well. So thank you so much for your time and your generosity.
Thanks so much, Bob. I really enjoyed being on the show.
Well, please come back and give us updates and highlights of things that are changing in the economy as well.
Fantastic. I'd love to.
Yes, sir.
All right. Have a good one.
You as well. Bye-bye. Today's episode was engineered by Mitch White with graphic and marketing by Tristan Dickie. Special thanks to our guest, Jason Radisson, for taking time to be with us. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or wherever you go to listen to your favorite pods. If you like the show, please share it with a friend and give us a review. That's always appreciated. Thank you for spending time with us today, and we will be back next week with more.